Okay, so in this series, we're going to talk about the new technology and war tactics that existed during this time period. And your job is to be able to describe the conditions on the war front for soldiers. When you describe what the conditions were like for the soldiers, you want to talk about the technology and the war tactics that were present during their time on the front. Okay, so try to do the best that I could on this map. I mean, you've seen this map before in the last video, but World War I was fought on two separate fronts, two separate places. So not only was Germany fighting on this eastern front, so on the eastern side of Western Europe, they fought against Russia. They also fought on the western front, or the western border of their nation, against France, the United Kingdom, and eventually the United States. So this is the western front over here on the western side of Germany, and this is the eastern front. They also fought in the sea with unrestricted submarine warfare, so subs would blow up ships and things like that. So three fronts the war was fought on. When we talk about the Western Front, and here's the map again, this is the Western Front over here on the western side of Germany. It was a 500-mile long battlefield, and it was a network. It was basically trenches that were dug, so little ditches in the ground that soldiers could jump into for cover. In between the two opposing sides' trenches, you had minefields, and then buried in the trenches so that they could attack the other side that was coming onto them. They had bunkers where they could hunker down for like safety and protection. And they had nests, it should say nests, for their machine guns to be set up so they could shoot out into that area between the trenches. And that area between the trenches was called no man's land. You were exposed. You were likely to get shot or get injured out in no man's land. There was no safety. There was no jumping into a ditch for cover or hiding under something or behind a tree. Like, it was a barren field. And so the Western Front was known as the meat grinder. And the meat grinder was exactly what it says it was. If you put sausage or something into a meat grinder, it comes out all mutilated and mashed up and ground up. And that's what happens when you jumped out of your trench into no man's land. You were ripe for the picking as far as being shot or mutilated by barbed wire or blown to bits by the mines that were there, blown up by the artillery shells that were shot out. Okay. And the reason, so the trenches were really easy to defend because you were facing up towards your opponent and they had to get down at you, and you could shoot them, you could stab them, you could all kinds of things. But it made it really difficult to jump out of your trench and go gain ground. So they were easy to defend because of the setup, but it was incredibly difficult to gain any ground. And if you look at your notes, you know, that's one of your questions. What made them easy positions to hold but difficult to mount an offensive attack? And what weapons were used? I mean, mass production of weapons made it really easy to defend, but really hard to get out and go kill people and gain more ground. Machine guns were mass produced in factories and manufacturing plants and sent out to the front lines. Mines to set up minefields. You had barbed wire, and then ammunition. Okay. Life for soldiers was incredibly difficult. I don't even know that it's possible to put it into words, how incredibly difficult and challenging it was. You were pretty much confined to the trenches, so water spill off, so you might be sitting or stepping in puddles of water. Your feet would get soaked. There's constant artillery being fired and gunfire, so the constant explosions in your ear. Poisonous gas, so you always had to have your gas mask ready. You could develop trench foot by sitting in the trenches, so, you know, having dry socks and boots was incredibly important to your survival. And there were rats everywhere, looking for food, looking for things to eat. And if food wasn't there, you know, you were the food. And because you weren't taking showers every day, keeping clean. I mean, lice was prevalent. There wasn't always enough food to eat. You went to the bathroom as needed. And so, life was incredibly difficult and uncomfortable and challenging. And, so here are some pictures of soldiers sitting down in the trenches. He's kind of hunkered in a little, hollowed out piece of the ground in the trench. These are all the rats that they've caught and they've hung up. And then trench foot, your feet would turn black, toes would be black. You might have to have them amputated. So it gives you kind of an idea of what they faced each day. And some of these pictures came from your photo essays too. This screen is blank, but if you pull the PowerPoint out of Teams, there's a video here that's posted of what life was like living in the trenches. It's a reenactment. Okay. Okay. And trench warfare is another type, one of your words, and blockade is. So let's talk about the types of warfare in World War I. The first one is trench warfare, and we kind of talk about that. It was long, extensive miles of trenches or ditches that were dug for soldiers to kind of peek their heads out and shoot at the enemy and duck in for cover. And sometimes there were boards across. You could use that for cover. You could use that to run across, move equipment across, and things like that. Chemical warfare was another type of warfare. So the poisonous gas. You wanted to make sure that you had your gas mask ready at any moment to prevent you breathing in that poisonous gas. And then unrestricted submarine warfare. So naval blockades, and blockade is one of your terms, is where ships would set up a station where they wouldn't let any ships come through because they didn't want their enemies being supplied with medicine or ammunition or weapons or food or anything. And then the submarines they would blow up those ships to stop them from bringing supplies, and submarines were hard to locate. The United States didn't want to be involved in the war right away, but when the Germans' U-boats sunk the Lusitania, it was a British passenger liner, and it had about 128 Americans on board. It shifted the mindset of Americans to start consider, we may need to get involved in this war. This may be something that we have to be involved in. But what really brought the U.S. into the war was the Zimmerman telegram. And that was a telegram that was created or written by German diplomat, foreign minister, to Mexico, and told Mexico that it was Arthur Zimmerman from Germany, telling Mexico that if they attacked the United States from their location, and when the Germans won the war, that Mexico could have all that land back that we had won when we fought them or took it in the Mexican-American Wars. So Texas, New Mexico, and California. And that really angered the United States, and we finally joined in the war. But the Lusitania shifts our mindset to wanting to get involved. And then the Zimmerman telegram is what forces our hand to actually step in and start fighting the war. We've talked about trench war already, but each side kind of hunkered down in their trenches for safety. Very easy to defend, but difficult to take. If you've ever tried to get at somebody who's below you, it's a really difficult position to be in. The land between the trenches was called no man's land. We've kind of talked about that. We've talked about the difference between the Western and Eastern Front. When Russia pulls out of World War I, Germany can devote more of its troops and soldiers and weapons and stuff to the Western Front to fight there. But on the Eastern Front, Germany was more industrialized than Russia, so Russia had a very hard time of beating back the German soldiers and troops. And then to top it all off, there was a pandemic, and you know what this word means. There was a pandemic in 1918 in which a deadly strain of the influenza virus, or the flu, spread rapidly across the globe. Now, a pandemic is a virus that spreads across the globe and is dangerous. But with soldiers from all over the world being in such close, tight quarters with one another, that virus spread so fast, and it killed more than 20 people during this time. You had in your assignments a picture of a baseball player wearing a mask in the middle of a baseball game. And you were asked to kind of think about how life has changed, how life changes in society when a pandemic rises to the surface, and what we've learned in the past 100 years to kind of deter some of the spreading of the virus. Okay.